Good morning and good afternoon, and thank you for joining APQC's Financial Management webinar, Developing High Potential Talent in Finance. A few things to note before we begin. Audio is available through your computer through the dial-in, but all of the attendee lines are muted. You can submit questions at any time throughout the presentation. We will be answering them during the Q&A session at the end of today's presentation. And finally, today's session is being recorded. You will receive a copy of the slides and the recording within the next few days via email. Now I'd like to take a moment to introduce you to today's speakers. First, we have Marisa Brown, the Senior Principal Research Lead for Financial Management and Supply Chain Management, excuse me. And then we have Alyssa Tucker, who is the Principal Research Lead for Human Capital Management that will be presenting alongside Marisa. So without any further ado, I think I'll turn it over to you, Marisa.
Thanks so much, Sarah. So today, Alyssa and I want to share with you some groundbreaking research that we've recently completed here at APQC. We want to share some insights into what we've learned about high potential talent development programs in finance. So first, what we're going to do is talk to you briefly about the importance of this research and why we conducted it. And then Alyssa, who's our human capital management expert, is going to talk about what we learned in terms of the structure and the foundation of these finance high potential programs. Then I'm going to walk you through some of the areas where we saw some room for improvement in the finance high potential programs. And lastly, we won't leave you hanging. We'll talk about how organizations can close the gaps and move forward to improve the outcomes of these programs in finance. We'll tie in some best practices as well. So with that said, we'll then wrap up with key takeaways and take your questions. So let me start with what we did and what we've learned and why we did it. So APQC has been studying financial management and the evolution of the finance organization for many years. And what we are seeing is that as the finance organization is really shifting its role and striving to move away from general accounting and strict finance and become more of the solutions engine for the enterprise to really help with strategic planning as well as the execution of the plans, there's a need for new and different leadership skills for today and specifically for the future. So in June of 2017, just a few months ago, we collected data from over 200 finance professionals to understand what's happening inside organizations today in terms of developing the high potential employees into these future leaders of tomorrow. What we see is that there is a need for data savvy leadership. There's a need for individuals who are very tech literate and comfortable with the vast quantities of data organizations are facing today. And also comfortable with an analytical and strategic role. If you went to college for finance, this may be a big departure from the skill set that you focused in on and learned historically. So where are organizations going today, and how are they doing, and what can they do to improve growing this pipeline of future leaders? So what we did was we started by asking, how important is it in your organization that you have a program to groom the leadership of tomorrow for finance? And what we see is that 41% said it's very important, and another 40% it's moderately important. So we've got 81% that says basically we recognize that it's important to have a program to groom and develop our high potential finance employees. So now Alyssa is going to talk about what we learned about these programs out there today and in terms of how they're structured and how they're working. Alyssa?
Wonderful. Thanks, Marisa. So Marisa just shared with us that our survey respondents believe that high potential programs need to be tailored to the finance function. So what I want to do now is turn and look at what our respondents said about the structure of these finance high potential programs. Overall, we saw that the finance high potential programs which we studied, they share many elements in common with the best practices high potential programs that APQC has researched over the years. And in many ways, we see that these programs are set up for success in developing a pipeline of future finance leaders. So first, we see that respondents' efforts to establish that robust pool of future finance leaders, these efforts begin in recruiting. And as you can see on this slide, 85% of respondents leverage their high potential programs when recruiting new finance professionals into their organization. So touting high potential development and advancement opportunities during recruiting is in line with what APQC has seen in previous best practices research. Whether the high potential program is a function specific program or generally applicable across the entire enterprise, best practice organizations communicate about this program during recruiting, and they do so in order to attract the best talent to the organization. When the high potential program is tailored to a specific function, such as the finance function, communicating about it during recruiting has an added advantage in that it helps attract talent that's looking not just for a job, but also for a career in that particular profession. So promoting the finance high potential talent program, promoting it in recruiting, it helps attract individuals who are interested in spending their careers working in finance. So these are individuals who are primed to stay and advance, making it more likely that the organization's high potential program will indeed achieve its objective of building a pipeline of well-prepared future finance leaders. So in addition to recruiting, selection practices are another way in which finance high potential programs are structured for success. When selecting employees for high potential finance development programs, our survey respondents' methods echo the findings of our previous APQC best practices research. So the methods that respondents most commonly use to identify finance professionals to be developed for successively greater levels of responsibility include performance appraisals, 360-degree feedback, and skills gap assessments. So most of us are likely familiar with performance appraisals. For the purposes of selecting participants for inclusion in a high potential program, it's important that performance appraisals assess both an individual's current performance as well as their future potential at the organization. Now, 360-degree feedback is a method of collecting performance feedback from a range of people that an individual works with, and it includes collecting that feedback not only from the superiors that that individual works with, but also from a range of peers. Then skills gaps assessments. These can focus on general leadership competencies, and they can also focus on more technical competencies. And we see organizations accessing skills gaps assessments from external providers as well as developing them internally. It depends on the organization, and many organizations use a mix of internal assessment tools and external tools. So performance appraisals, 360-degree feedback, and skills gap assessments, they're not only useful for selecting the finance candidates who are going to participate in a high potential program. They're also useful for identifying which development opportunities to provide and when a promotional or even a lateral move is in order for that individual. In addition, these tools can be used to track development progress and to guide career discussions and decisions. So they're very useful not only for selection, but also for many other stages of the high potential program. Another finance selection practice that mirrors general best practice relates to how many employees are targeted to participate in the high potential development program. So high potential talent programs, they should have enough participants to ensure that they will generate a sufficient pool of talent for the organization's future leadership roles. Yet, on the other hand, participation shouldn't be such a large percentage of the employee pool, say more than 1/4, because then it can dilute the intent, which is to target high potential employees. It also can become too expensive and time consuming for the organization to effectively execute the high potential program when it is involving too large a pool of employees. So when we look at this slide and we look at our survey responses, we see that most commonly the range for finance function high potential programs is to have between 16 to 20% of employees, finance function employees, participating in the high potential program. And this is an appropriate size. I want to note here that when a high potential talent program is too selective or too inclusive, it loses its effectiveness as a recruiting as well as an engagement and retention tool. So if candidates can't realistically see that they have a solid chance to participate in the program and advance in their careers, they're naturally going to be disinterested or frustrated. So the percentage of individuals selected to participate in the FM high potential talent programs, it does matter for a variety of reasons. So let's move beyond selection and talk about development approaches. We see that most respondents also adhere to best practice in terms of how they're delivering development to their finance high potentials. Best practices for developing high potential employees include providing rotational assignments, workshops, individualized coaching, offering a broad selection of stretch project assignments. Mentoring is another best practice used to develop high potential employees. So let's turn and look at our survey participants. 85% of them always or almost always provide coaching to their high potential finance employees, and 89% offer rotational assignments in operating roles outside of finance. Now, rotational assignments in this situation are giving those future finance leaders first-hand experience with different aspects of the business and giving them the opportunity to see a bigger picture of the enterprise. In APQC's best practices research, we often see coaching being used at higher levels or later years in a high potential program, and it's often used to close very specific individual development gaps. But when we look at our research on job rotations, we see that it's often in the early years of participation in a high potential program that these job rotations take place. In addition, we see job rotations among best practice organizations being used to help future leaders develop relationships with others working in different areas as well as different levels of the organization. And the benefit here is that as the high potential employee progresses in their career at the organization, these relationships provide them with a network of support and guidance that really can boost their effectiveness as a leader. So rotational programs in particular are great for developing skills and capabilities in the high potential employee, but also for developing those relationships that leaders need to be effective. So in addition to using proven selection practices and development approaches, It's also important that high potential talent programs are developing the right capabilities among their participants. In particular, it's important that these programs are developing the skills that future leaders will need, rather than just the skills that are being used by leaders today. When we look at the types of skills that the finance high potential programs from our survey are developing, we see importance is being placed on developing these future skills. So in other words, we see that the development curriculum is another area in which finance high potential programs are set up for success. On this slide, you can see that respondents recognize the new data and analytics skills that future finance leaders will need. In fact, all of our respondents believe that their organization culture will become increasingly data-driven in the future. So accordingly, they rate the importance of finance high potentials being adept at data-driven decision-making as high. Now, that said, only 16% of our respondents have already achieved a maturity level related to being data-driven, where they are using real-time data and using it to make data-driven decisions as an everyday part of how business is done at the organization. So most of our organizations have a lot of development themselves to do in terms of becoming data-driven. So it just shows the importance that the high potential program be developing finance employees, be developing these data skills in finance employees, so as the organization advances in its maturity level, they will be prepared to lead that data-driven organizational culture. Now, one key area where the focus on data and analytics is important for finance high potential employees to have skills in is in predictive analytics. Skills in predictive analytics, they're in demand across industries, across organizational functions, but the need is especially acute for the finance function if the function is to contribute to the organization's strategic planning and the execution of the organization's strategy. So for finance to take a bigger, larger, more strategic role in the organization, it is going to be very important for future finance leaders to have predictive analytics skills as part of their data-driven decision-making toolkit. So from our survey, we see that a combined 87% of the CFOs and finance directors that we reached out to consider in-depth training on predictive analytics as an essential or important priority for high potential finance employees. So this just further shows that our survey participants understand the importance of preparing high potential talent to carry out future, not just current, leadership responsibilities. So in addition to skills in emerging areas like data and analytics, most respondents reported that it is very important that finance high potential talent programs also focus on developing perennial leadership skills and soft skills. So you see on this slide the top 5 leadership soft skills that our survey participants say are very important for finance high potentials to develop include communication, strategic planning, process management, listening, and change management. Now, these skills mirror those that our APQC research has uncovered when we've looked more generally and asked organizations what leadership skills future leaders will need to possess. And in particular, our leadership research has found that communication, listening, and change management are becoming increasingly important leadership capabilities. Now, for finance leaders, it's going to be especially important to be able to communicate. Finance leaders will need to be able to present persuasively and concisely with top executives and be able to craft easy to understand messages, for example. So these leadership skills are very important, in particular calling out, I want to call out those skills related to listening and communication, important for all leaders in any area of the organization, but especially important for finance leaders in working with executives from other areas of the business. So finally, there are some future-focused financial and business capabilities that finance high potentials also need to develop. And we see, topping this list, I guess, in terms of importance, according to our survey responses, are 1, the ability to assess business risk, 2, the ability to advise directors on shareholder value creation, and then 3, the ability to analyze capital investment proposals. So our respondent organizations understand that being able to analyze business risks as the speed of change is increasing in business, it's critical. And they also see that the finance function, as it strives to play a larger, more strategic role in planning and execution for the enterprise, it needs to have high potential finance employees learn to analyze key performance indicators that are operational in nature. They need to be prepared to expand beyond accounting-oriented measures that have historically been evaluated by the finance organization. So we have just talked about how finance high potential talent programs are set up for success. The structure of these programs reflects the best practice and skill sets that need to be developed in future finance leaders. Now I'm going to turn things over to Marisa, and she's going to talk about how these finance high potential programs are actually performing.
Thanks, Alyssa. So it looks like we've got a solid foundation and that these programs are looking good, but more important than the inputs are the outputs and the outcomes. And while Alyssa had the good news story, unfortunately what we saw is that when it comes to execution and the results that many of these programs are achieving, there is some room for improvement. We saw quite a number of gaps in terms of the importance of a skill and the level of preparation of the graduates of these programs on those skills. There's just not enough happening right now in terms of some of these future critical skills. So we also saw gaps in the soft and the finance skills as well. So what I want to do is walk through some of these gaps that we saw. First up, predictive analytics. So Alyssa showed you 87% of CFOs and finance directors think that this is an important skill for finance leaders of tomorrow. There is no doubt that this is a new area. Historically, we didn't train finance individuals in predictive analytics, and because it's an emerging area, some of the early adopters are having to forge their own path. There's not necessarily proven, time-tested best practices for how to develop predictive analytical skills in finance leaders, but as tools and technology and capabilities mature, this is an area where there's a huge gap. 87% say it's important, and in only 42% of our research participants did they say that those completing the high potential program in finance were very well prepared for working in predictive analytics or being able to execute along those lines. That's a pretty sizable gap. as we see increasing amounts of data coming into organizations, and as we look at these skills, like Alyssa mentioned, the need to understand operational performance indicators, there's a lot of data that's got to get turned into actionable insights and needs to be communicated to the rest of the organization. So we can't overemphasize the fact that the CFO and the Director of Finance is saying we've got to get some predictive analytics training going on, and there's not results to match up to that importance. So this is one big gap that we saw. As Alyssa showed, organizations are all increasingly talking about becoming data-driven. Now that's not a new song. We've been hearing that for a long time, but as tools and technologies are changing, this is becoming more of a reality. So one of the things that we looked at was robotics process automation. Now, this is an area where you're starting to bring in your historical automation of business processes with artificial intelligence and cognitive computing, and really making it so organizations can deliver process excellence in a cost-effective manner. There's no human involved in robotics process automation, and it helps eliminate some of the productivity issues we see. The robots don't take breaks, they don't need vacation, they don't leave and join your competition. They can handle a lot of the menial, repetitive, and low-level work that really isn't so attractive and appealing to individuals like high-level or high-potential finance employees. But what we see is that 22% of the participants say it is very likely that in the future they're going to have some level, in the future meaning next 2 years, so that's not like down the road, that's around the corner. They're going to have some level of robotic process automation. And what we see is another 56% say it's likely. So right there you've got 78% saying that this is increasing in popularity and this is becoming a high priority for my organization. And then we look on the right side of the screen and you see that most of these organizations are saying it's important that our high potentials learn how to drive productivity gains by leveraging the robotics process automation. We need them to get on it because this way, and this will allow them to free up their time by driving those gains in productivity to provide more intellectual and intelligent ways of communicating and helping to drive decision-making inside the organization. Your finance high potentials are the ones who can help with scenario building and predictive modeling. As long as they have enabled the organization to continue doing what it needs to do in finance, they can then shift their time and focus to those high priority critical things of the future, the data-driven activities that we need to see. So, Alyssa mentioned the importance of soft skills for finance leaders. As they're presenting data and information and sharing their insights with other business leaders, they need to be able to do so in an effective, compelling, persuasive manner. And what we see is that communication was rated as the #1 most important skill for future finance leaders. And as they engage in meaningful dialogue with their key stakeholders, they really need to be strong communicators. But only 48%, so not even half of the individuals completing these high potential development programs in finance are rated as very well prepared in terms of communication. That's a pretty sizable gap. And the fact that not even half of the graduates are considered very well prepared in the #1 most important skill is a big area for improvement. Now, they often say that we have 2 ears and 1 mouth because listening is more important than speaking, and that is reflected in the importance that listening was given versus speaking in terms of developing skills and high potential finance talent. Half the participants rated listening as very important. But unfortunately, again, we see a gap with those who complete the program. Only 39% are coming out of the program very well prepared in terms of their listening skills. So even lower than their communication skills, listening is pretty poor. Public speaking, for those who truly want to rise to the senior levels of finance leadership, is an important skill. It's lower rated in terms of all finance high potential talent. It's only 36% of the organizations in our research said it's very important. But even there we see a gap. Not as important, and they're still not graduating from these programs with levels of preparedness that would be considered acceptable. So we've talked about some of your data and analytical skills, your soft skills. Now let's look at the business and finance specific competencies that Alyssa mentioned a minute ago. So these are important skills that are really very heavy on the analytical side of things. So the first set of bars on the left side show you how important these skills are for finance high potential talent to develop. So you can see that it ranges from 41% to 50% saying this is very important. But when you look on the right side in terms of how many graduates or those who complete these programs are very well prepared, it ranges from 36 to 41%. There's a pretty significant gap. And one of the areas where they're graduating the least well-prepared individuals is on assessing business risk. And yet that is the most important thing they need to be able to do. So we have a significant gap here, not just on business risk, but advising shareholders on value creation. Even the one about analyzing operational KPIs, we see here there's a gap in terms of importance versus preparation. Bottom line is, considering the investments that these organizations are making in this finance high potential program, Alyssa talked about job rotations, and that's an expensive value proposition. If you think about it, it takes the individual out of the role for which they were hired and puts them in another role to gain exposure and experience. It's worth doing, but it comes at a cost because somebody has to do the role for which they were originally recruited. These are expensive programs to run. You should expect better outcomes. Perhaps when we look at this, we start to see a less than rosy picture emerging. So those completing the program are not coming out very well prepared on the critical skills. And now, looking at this slide, we're not even getting everyone through to graduating from the program. So we asked what percentage actually complete this program. And if you look at this, and only 7% of the organizations do more than 3/4 of the candidates actually finish their program. That's pretty stunning. 7% have more than 3/4 finish the program. Only 22% have more than half their participants finish. The majority of them are somewhere between 11 and 50% of the individuals going through this program are finishing this program. So the organization's investing a lot of time and a lot of money in these programs, and individuals aren't finishing them, and when they do, they're not coming out with the skills they really need. So we have a problem here. We asked, how effective is your finance organization at some of these things related to evaluating the overall effectiveness of your high potential program? Let's start from the bottom up. Retaining your high potential employees. Only 33%, so only a third of more than 200 organizations are very effective at retaining their high potential employees. So we just looked at all the investments being made in them, and then the skills they need, the gaps on those skills, the low completion rate, and now they're not even keeping these folks around. So in terms of ROI, to speak the language of the finance organization, we're not getting it on these programs. Moving up from the bottom, not even 40% say they have the desired number of qualified FM leadership job candidates. One of the reasons to have a high potential program is to groom your future leaders. But these organizations are still experiencing a leadership shortage. They don't have enough candidates for the roles they have. And you see, moving up again, intervening to retain the high-risk, high potentials, again, less than 40% are very effective at doing that. So what we're seeing is that these high potential employees are being recruited, right? 85% of the organizations are using this program as a recruiting tool. It's dangled out there as, hey, we got this great thing, come join us. But once you come join us, you're likely not to complete the program, And if you do, you may not have all the skills you need, and you're probably not going to stay at our organization. This is not a win-win situation for either the candidate or the enterprise. Organizations are doing a better job at anticipating the skill requirements their future leaders need and assessing the readiness of their high potentials compared to their succession management plans. But we have an opportunity, so if we know where we need to go and our program has a strong foundation, then we have a way, and the good news is APQC is going to give you some guidance on how to close this gap, how to turn this around and get your high potential program to be a high performing one. Perhaps we start to uncover what's causing this gap when we look at this slide. So how easy is it for your finance organization to recruit well-qualified external finance professionals to fill leadership positions? So basically, it's pretty easy to find people on the outside who can fill your leadership roles, according to what people are reporting here. So in other words, 60% of the organizations find it easy or very easy to recruit from the outside. So what we're seeing is maybe we have a problem of commitment. If the organization is willing to bring in people from the outside versus promoting from within, versus taking these people that they're grooming for their high potential talent program and promote them, instead they're bringing in folks from the outside. As an employee, you might look at that and say, they're not really committed to me. I don't know that I'll feel so committed to them. It goes both ways. The organization may look at it and say, hey, we're not keeping these high potential employees. They're bailing. We have, what, a 33% success rate on that. Let's go find talent on the outside. So it's a two-way street. The lack of commitment from both sides may be compounding the issue. So let's take a look. I'm going to ask Alyssa to bring in some of her HCM expertise and share how can we turn around this situation and close these gaps and really help organizations grow future finance leaders who understand the unique business model of that organization, who understand their culture, who understand their future direction, and that see that there is value in staying with the enterprise. Alyssa?
Thank you, Marisa. So Marisa just shared with us that finance high potential talent programs could be realizing much better results for their organizations. And the good news is, as Marisa said, there is these programs are structured well. They're focused on developing the right kinds of skills. So that's a good foundation to start from. And we have some suggestions, which I'll share right now, for how we can take that good foundation and execute better so that organizations see the intended results that they want from these programs. So let's talk about some ways to improve. Career paths are the first area of improvement that I want to talk about. Less than half of respondents reported being very effective at developing formal career paths for their finance professionals. Formal career paths help high potential employees see possible routes from where they are today in an organization to where they want to be. They illustrate the points along the way that that employee needs to stop off at in order to get to where they want to be. So they illustrate things such as the necessary training, accomplishments, experiences, whether transfers are needed, promotions that are needed along the way to that desired career destination. Career paths also help managers and employees better understand gaps and create development plans to close these skill or capability gaps. They show high potential employees that the organization is committed not just to their development but also to their advancement, and that's a really important piece that these high potentials in finance need to see, that the organization isn't just dedicated to investing in their development, but also is equally dedicated to making sure that they have the opportunity to advance and use those skills that they're developing. And then formal career paths help ensure that the skills that are being developed in your high potential program actually get applied to benefit both the high potential employee and the organization. And as Marisa talked about, there's a lot of expense and time that goes into things like job rotations, developing career paths, and developing training programs. And the organization really needs to be able to see the benefit from those investments. So APQC has a number of recommendations for establishing and utilizing career paths. So first, career paths and the associated milestones should be formally outlined. There doesn't have to be just one linear career path. What's most important is that there are options for career movement, and that many of these options involve advancement, but some may be lateral moves. Lateral moves can help individuals close capability gaps, and they can also help keep a high potential employee growing, even if your organization doesn't immediately have an available advancement opportunity. So that employee might be ready for advancement, you don't have an open position. A lateral move might be a way to develop additional skills until an open advancement position becomes available. So the development continues and the high potential employee is able to understand that advancement is something and movement is something that the organization is committed to helping them find. So once formal career paths have been defined and they've been documented, it's really important to communicate about them both to the high potential employees and to their managers. And here I can't emphasize enough the importance of training managers on how to provide development and career path guidance to their high potential employees. Another really important thing to do is to also set things up so that your high potential employees can get some self-service access to information on your career paths, to career planning tools, and to associated development opportunities. Ideally, high potential employees should have the opportunity to direct their own development and advancement rather than having to rely on their manager or the organization to direct these for them. You're going to have a much better, much easier time engaging your high potential employees if they are able to access and see these resources on their own. And not just rely on the organization or their manager having time to do that. So the next area for improvement relates to internal promotion practices. Career paths really are only useful when the organization is indeed promoting employees rather than primarily filling open positions with externally sourced talent. And Marisa showed that slide which showed that it is relatively easy for finance organizations to fill their open leadership positions with externally sourced talent, and that can be part of the problem that is going on here and why these programs aren't getting executed better. We see in our survey results that less than half of respondents are very effective at hitting targets for promoting internal talent into open finance roles. And then only 39% said that they're very effective at promoting finance high potentials at the appropriate time for continued development. So these shortcomings, they not only stall the development process, but they can also drive high potential employees to look for continued development opportunities at other employers, which may be why we are seeing low graduation rates from our FM finance high potential programs among the survey respondents. So we have a number of suggestions for ensuring that high potential employees actually receive advancement opportunities. And first among these is that it's important to have formal talent review and succession planning processes in place in order to track the development progress of high potential talent and to plan for their future potential roles in your organization. Now, ideally, these processes should involve functional managers and leaders as well as HR staff coming together to review and discuss the entire high potential talent pool. It's also important that the organization set targets for internal hiring and promotion and hold those making hiring decisions responsible for working to realize these targets. Now, this can be accomplished in a number of ways through, for example, formal tracking and reporting of internal promotion rates in internal hiring, inclusion of targets, internal promotion and hiring targets in hiring managers' performance goals and incentives. It's also helpful to obtain and act on feedback from those who have chosen to hire externally rather than within. Why did they make that choice, and are some of those reasons things that could be used to improve your high potential program? And then finally, organizations should strive to be transparent regarding advancement processes as well as job openings at the organization and advancement decisions. So high potential employees understand and can effectively leverage opportunities within the organization. That level of transparency and understanding can go a long way towards engaging and retaining high potential employees. Which is the topic that I want to talk about next. The third improvement area that I want to talk about is taking steps to protect the organization's investments in finance high potential programs. Our survey results show that organizations have a lot of room for improvement here. Less than half of respondents report being very effective at engaging, and only 33%, as Marisa shared, are very effective at retaining high potential finance employees. Now, APQC research suggests that career paths combined with internal promotion processes and targets will go a long way towards improving engagement and retention of high potential finance employees. What you see here on this slide are results from APQC's Open Standards benchmarking data. And this data shows that besides seeking better compensation, the top 2 reasons that employees leave are to seek a more prestigious position or better advancement opportunities elsewhere. So career paths, internal promotion, those are 2 essential things to making the execution of your high potential finance program work. Some other strategies that I want to share that can be very effective for engaging and retaining high potential talent in an organization. These are coming from our best practices research over the years. One is providing public recognition of high potential's accomplishments related to their development and advancement. So this is recognition within the organization. This might look like, might be giving them expertise, formal expertise, designations. It might be having leaders recognize these accomplishments at events and in newsletters. Another engagement and retention strategy is to give high potentials exposure to senior level employees for visibility as well as learning. Offer social networking, expertise location, communities of practice opportunities to supplement the high potential finance talent development would be very effective. Keep the development curriculum up to date so that it is indeed always imparting emerging skills and capabilities, such as those data and analytics capabilities. Encourage regular communication, open communications between high potentials and their managers as well as the high potential program leaders. It's really important that high potentials are kept aware of the organization's changing needs and expectations expectations. It's important that managers and high potential program leaders are aware of how the high potentials are feeling and able to flag potential engagement and retention risk among individual high potentials. And then one last engagement technique I want to mention, which is more of an emerging strategy, and it's to analyze data on the organization's current and past high potential employees and use this data to detect trends and to even predict red flags related to high potential engagement and retention. So, for example, are there certain behaviors that are predicted, that can predict the likelihood that a high potential employee will leave the organization in the next year? We are seeing organizations do this, and that is a strategy that could be very beneficial for finance functions. And just to kind of wrap all of these improvement strategies up, I just want to share this last slide. So all of the tips for improvement that we've just talked about, so career paths, career development tools, talent assessment, succession planning, internal promotion targets, having a focus on engagement and retention, these all are going to work best when they are integrated and they're delivered in a formal and standard way across the finance organization. And really, to achieve this level of effectiveness in any high potential program, it requires having adequate funds. And on this slide, we can see that among our survey participants, only about 1/3 report very adequate funding for their finance high potential programs. And I think, you know, there's really no better business case for improving funding than the low graduation and retention rates for high potential finance talent at responding organizations, which Marisa shared with us. The cost of improving existing finance high potential programs, which, as we've discussed, you know, they've got the appropriate structure, they're focused on developing future focused capabilities. So the cost of improving these already well established programs really is arguably going to be less than the expense that organizations face now when their high potential talent is leaving and they're having to spend money to replace them and repeat the development process. So these are some strategies for improving the execution of well-structured and guided finance high potential programs, which we saw our survey respondents have. Now I'm going to turn things over to Marisa, and she's going to share some key takeaways, and then we're going to open up the webinar for your questions.
Thanks, Alyssa. So basically, establish a solid foundation for your finance high potential talent program. I would say most organizations get a check on that one. But then do not forget to focus on execution. So it's not enough to put it in place and walk away. You've got to focus on execution to ensure a robust pipeline of future finance leaders. Shift the organization's mindset from using this program as just a recruiting tool. Instead, really view this as a development and retention tool for high potential finance talent. Then it should follow that the program receives the attention and funding needed. And then lastly, support the evolution of the finance function into a more strategic role by investing in the development of new skills needed for the finance future leaders. So with that said, I'm going to turn it back over to Sarah, who is going to share with us some questions that we have received from our audience. Sarah?
Yeah, thanks, Marisa, and thanks, Alyssa. We don't have too much time to answer a bunch of questions, but we will get to as many as we can. Let me remind everybody on the call here that you can submit your question through GoToWebinar in the Q&A feature. If we don't have time to answer all of the questions today, which I don't think we will be sure to answer them after the webinar and share the results via the email that I send with links to the recording and slides. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and get started. The first one that I have here is, should high potentials know that they are high potentials? And then to follow on to that, should other employees know as well?
This is Alyssa. I can start with that one. I think high potential, this is something that has been debated in the talent space for a number of years. And my opinion, as well as I think the prevailing current opinion, is that high potentials should know that they are high potentials, and other employees should know too. This gets to that whole issue of transparency and being able to set accurate expectations for your employees. I think if you want to have engaged employees and you want to retain your employees, not just your high potentials, but all of your employees, it's important for them to understand how these programs work, understand the assessment criteria, the development requirements, the career path, what is needed to move into a new role. When they understand that, I think you can have fair conversations about who is included and not included in a high potential program, and it gives the opportunity to all employees to consider themselves and prepare themselves to potentially participate in such a program. So I think transparency is important.
Great. Thanks, Alyssa. The next question here, to the extent that 89% engage operations in order to see the big picture, won't operations sometimes hire those finance people? And do organizations size the program to address this leakage?
I can start with that one too. We did talk a lot about the importance of job rotation programs, and we saw in our survey that the finance job rotation programs, and this is a really effective practice, they involve not just maybe rotating through the finance organization, but also rotating through other areas outside of finance in the business. And when we talked about what's the appropriate number of people to participate in your high potential program, I do think organizations should plan for what this listener said is leakage. I think that that's okay for that to happen, and I think you should plan for some of that. I think ultimately it benefits the business when the employee stays in the business, even if it's not in your finance function, and that individual going into operations can be a valuable partner and contact in the future. So that kind of gets back to the advice: don't make your program too restrictive, because you may not have enough talent in the end. But you also want to make it big enough that it's inclusive.
And this is Marisa. I would just chime in. I agree with Alyssa. Some leakage is good leakage. We don't necessarily want to say you need a 100% graduation rate for everyone who starts in that program to finish in that finance high potential development program, because getting them into another part of the organization is still a win for the organization.
Thank you. Thank you both. I think we have time just for one more, and I'm not sure how quick the answer for this one will be, but how do you teach communication and listening skills?
I can give a quick go at that. I think you can provide training in communication in particular, but as well as listening. But even more important is probably to build on any formal training through coaching, feedback. Feedback not just from a communications coach, but also from peers, and incorporating that in your development. We've seen in our best practices leadership development research that role modeling is something that best practice organizations use to develop these kinds of soft skills in leaders. So it's really important that current leaders are being tasked with role modeling the soft skill competencies that the organization sees is important. We see organizations really putting a lot of effort into requiring that their current leaders model these desired behaviors, and that can be very effective for communication as well as listening skills.
Thanks, Alyssa. Marisa, if you don't have anything to add, I think that we should move on towards the end of the presentation here.
Sure. Sarah?
Yeah, okay. So you can learn more about the collection that Alyssa, or the the topic that Alyssa and Marisa have been talking about by visiting this particular content collection. It is growing, but you can visit it at apqc.org/finance talent. And then finally, of course, you can contact Alyssa and Marisa. Their emails are etucker and mbrown@apqc.org. I will include links to those in the follow-up email as well. And then you can always keep up to date with our upcoming research, additional webinars coming out, what kind of events APQC is hosting through the expertise pages for both finance and human capital, also linked there. And then connect with us on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, and follow our blog with more posts from Marisa and Alyssa on these topics and others. And like the slide says here, don't forget to participate in our post-webinar satisfaction survey. We like to continuously improve, and we can't do so without feedback from you guys. So without any further ado, I'll wrap today's session up. Thank you, Marisa. Thank you, Alyssa. And thanks to all of the attendees. Have a great day, and we'll see you next time.